Hi all. So in this video, we are going to cover the projects being carried out at Stanford University, previous as well as the current projects and the corresponding publications. I'm a little late on this one, but my apologies for that, but I had some commitments. So the flow of this presentation will be that we'll start discussing the projects, and correspondingly I'll try to cover all the papers being published. At the end, I will also cover some other miscellaneous papers which are not included as a part of any project but are interesting. This is the Stanford University website, infolab.stanford.edu. To go to all the projects, we can see all the projects here. These are all the current projects. To see the past projects, we can click on this link. This is one way of doing it. The other way is directly going to the publication. Here you can see all the publication year-wise, or you can also see the publication project-wise. For example, for this project course rank, there were 13 publications, the latest one being in 2011, which is information seeking, convergence of search, recommendation, and advertising. You can get the PDF of it here. So in general, this is how we are going to go take one project and discuss the papers relevant for that. So since we spoke about course rank, let's start with course rank. It's a social tool developed at Stanford InfoLab, helps students make informed choices and take advantage of the available learning options. So anonymously, students can rank the course, add their comments, rate the accuracy of each other's. Recommendations can also be given and organize their classes, devise a 4-year plan and track the progress. It's good to see that for such a small project, they have done 13 publications. It also serves as a tool for feedback. It also serves as a feedback for the faculty and the administrations. It's an open source project written in Java. Thinking out loud here, course rank, since it's getting feedback from the people itself, it's some kind of a small or restricted crowdsourcing. Moving on to the next slide. So let us briefly discuss the papers which were published with respect to this particular project. I've already opened this page and selected few of the papers that we will be discussing. So there were total around 13 publications. These are the papers which were published in 2008. Flexible recommendations for course planning. So basically, this talks about most recommendation methods are hardwired into the system and they support only fixed recommendation. The purpose of this demo is to show the expressivity of flexible recommendation workflow, how flexible recommendations can be efficiently processed over relational data. This is the next paper, flexible recommendations over rich data. So in this paper describes the concept of flexible recommendation workflow, the high level description of parameterized process for computing recommendation. These are the papers which were published in 2009. FlexRex. So this basically talks about a kind of a framework that decouples the definition of recommendation process from its execution and supports flexible recommendation over structured data. Data cloud, summarizing key search results over structured data. So in this paper basically couples the flexibility of key searches over structured data with the summarization and the navigational capabilities of tag clouds to help user access database. These two were the papers which were published in 2011. recommendation system with complex constraint. So up till now we haven't discussed any recommendation system which talks about certain constraints. So this paper suggests some recommendation and some implementation for the same. That's all we have for course rank. Moving on to the next project. Portia sounds a little bit of Spanish. It signifies privacy obligation and rights in technology for information assessment. Increasing use of computers in business, government, recreation, almost all aspects of daily life has led to the exposing of sensitive data. It's basically all our data is available in the cloud now and everywhere. So concerns about the ownership, control, privacy, and accuracy of data is a matter of utmost importance. The goals of this project is design and develop next generation of technologies to handle sensitive information, to create a conceptual framework for policy making and inquiry into the rights and the responsibility of data subjects, data owners, and data users. There were around 31 publications around this project from 2004 to 2013. So let us go through some of the papers which were published for this particular project. Economic design of reputation system. So in this paper, basically identifies certain key attributes such as trust and rate of contribution that drives the action of the user for trading system, whether they are cooperative, selfish, or malicious. Um, we then present an economic model that captures the behavior of the players in the system, that employs incentives and reputation schemes to mitigate the effects of freelancing and free riding and misbehavior. Going on to the next paper, privacy preserving OLAP. This basically talks about techniques for privacy preserving computation of multi-dimensional aggregates on data partition across multiple clients. Data from different clients is perturbed, randomized in order to preserve privacy before it is being integrated on the server. So basically, we are trying to randomize the data so that it cannot be, the dots cannot be connected. The next paper, beyond just data privacy. This paper basically argues that designing a system that guarantees privacy of the information may not just be enough. We have to also consider the price of it. For example, in the information preserve, whether the information is preserved adequately, does the system perform well? This point by preserving the concept of configuration that change that can capture the security, longevity, and the performance aspects of the managing information. Distributing data for secure database service. Um, uh, this paper actually talks about, earlier we used to use the concept of obfuscating or encryption, which was actually an overhead on the performance. So this paper basically discusses about a distributed architecture for secure database service is proposed. So basically, you are actually dividing and distributing your data. The distributed architecture provides both privacy as well as the fault tolerance for the client. In this paper, we provide algorithms for distributing the data. Our results include hardness of approximation results, and hence a heuristic greedy hill climbing algorithm for the distribution problem, partitioning the query at the client. So in the client side itself, the query is being partitioned, fetching the data from all the servers, and at the client, the data is being aggregated. So the last paper, data leakage detection. So in this case, it's assumed that the data that suppose we share it with multiple agents or multiple users, then yeah, sensitive information, and turns out that this data has been leaked. Then from which source it has been leaked. So this paper basically discusses about how to identify those leakages and what can be done to pinpoint to those leakages. The next project that we are going to discuss is GPS, the graph processing system. It's an open source system for scalable, graph tolerant, and easy to execute algorithms on extremely large graphs. GPS similar to Pregel and Apache Giraffe, which has been used in Facebook. The input graph is distributed across machines, and the vertices send each other messages to perform computation. It's nothing but analogous to map and reduce kind of a technique. So at each vertices, they have a method which can be implemented vertices dot compute like in Pregel. GPS in turns extends Pregel's API with master.compute to do some computation at the global level. GPS has an optional dynamic partitioning scheme to improve the performance. It has an optimization called as LALP, which reduces the network I/O. GPS programs can be implemented using higher level domain specific languages called green merle, which is nothing but a language constructor which enables intuitive and simple expressions of complicated algorithms. So let us go through some of the papers which were published as a part of this project. So the first paper that we are going to discuss is simplifying scalable graph processing with domain-specific language. Like we discussed in the previous slide, large-scale graph processing, which is having a massive data set, requires distributed processing. However, conventional frameworks for distributed graph processing, such as Pregel, uses non-traditional programming models that are well suited for parallelism and scalability, but inconvenient for implementing a non-trivial graph. So instead, this paper suggests using domain-specific language like Green Merle, which intuitively describes a graph algorithm and extends its compiler to generate equivalent Pregel implementation. So going to the next paper, optimizing graph algorithm on Pregel-like system. So this paper basically discusses some of the optimizations which they believe are not implemented in Pregel, like several optimization techniques to address these efficiencies. Our most general technique is based on idea of performing some serial computations on tiny fractions of input graphs, implementing Pregel's vertex-centric parallelism. We'll have to go into a lot of details to understand what optimization exactly they have done, but this paper basically discusses about that. Moving on to the craft or debugging tool for Apache Giraffe. So basically, this paper talks about a tool craft which supports debugging cycles that users typically go through. Users describe programmatically the set of vertices they are interested in inspecting. During execution, graph captures the context information of these vertices across the super steps. Using Giraffe's GUI, it can be visualized and the values can be seen. Um, Users replay the exact lines of compute.vertex functions that execute for the suspicious vertices and super steps by copying code that the graph generates into the development environment line by line debugger. So this is a debugging tool. Moving on to the next project, 3x. It's a software tool for conducting computational experiments on a systematic manner. It organizes the code, inputs and outputs of an experiment, records the results, and let it visualize so that they can drive execution interactively. The basic motivation behind this project was to organize the data that goes in and out of an experiment, as well as maintain the infrastructure for running them. Basically, the kind of a setup that we require to perform any kind of experiment, this provides the generic of it. It can be customized, but in general, this is the trouble that this software or tool addresses. So easing this burden will enable us to more quickly make interesting discoveries from the data experiment produces. What 3x provides a standard file system layout for an experiment repository where you can organize the code of your experiment along with the input data and the output definitions. 3x can keep complete records of the execution result in a systematic and a storage efficient manner. Instantly it will generate graphs or visualizations of the execution results as tables and chart. Operations on the experiments to create the repository to define our experiments, to plan, control, and manage executions on various target environments, and to access the result data. We're going to skip the papers being published around this project as it seems pretty simple. We'll go to the next project. So the next project that we are going to discuss is Panda, a system for provenance and data. Provenance, when we say that, it means nothing but the lineage or tracking data right from its source, all its modification, update, and all its derivation computations, and who did it and when, and all those information. So basically, this project tries to answer the following three questions. Explanation. The user might be particularly interested in a specific portion or part of the data set. So this project, Provenance, is basically supposed to drilling down to examine the source and the evolution of that particular element of interest. Verification. The derived data may appear, suspicious. Basically, we have processed it, or it might be transferred to some other place, and there it might be modified or whatever updates might be done. So verifying this thing. So this answer can also be addressed. It can also be given using this particular tool. Recomputation. Having found outdated or incorrect source of data, we may want to correct the errors, propagate the correctness forward to all the downstream data that might be affected. The primary goal of this particular project is seamlessly merge data-based and process-based provenance. So there is a difference between the two. The database and the process-based process, we might update or do something there. So these two provenance, basically, they are aiming to merge together so that the two type of provenance can be combined. Offers users a full range of fine-grained and the coarse-grained provenance. Define a set of useful operations for taking advantage of provenance after it has been captured, as well as the general purpose language for querying and analyzing provenance. Develop a general purpose open source system that is flexible and configurable enough. So let us now discuss some of the papers which were being published as a part of this project. This is the very first paper, provenance-based debugging and drilling down in data-oriented workflows. Panda for provenance and data is a system that supports the creation and the execution of data-oriented workflows with automatic provenance generation and built-in provenance tracing operations. So basically, this paper talks about the services in the background which will automatically take care of provenance generation and everything. Provenance-based refresh in data-oriented workflow. So like in the previous slide, we discussed that in case if we find out any wrong or outdated source of data, and if you want to correct it, then we might want to do a refresh. So this paper basically talks about that process. Our goal is to perform efficient selective refresh of elements in the output data, compute the latest values of the specific output elements when the input data may have changed, and this not only takes care of that, but it will transitively, take care of all the dependent data and everything, and it will update those as well. RAMP, a system for capturing and tracing provenance in map reduce workflow. So it's nothing but an extension to Hadoop that supports provenance capture and tracing of workflow of map and reduce job. Now let us discuss some of the miscellaneous papers and the trends going on in Stanford Lab. If we visit the site and browse the papers by years, then we can see in the last few years there hasn't been a lot of activity with very few papers published, and in 2018 there were no papers being put on this particular site. Still, let's go through some of the papers and see the trend of what's going on. So we can see here that a lot of papers were being published and a lot of research has been going on around crowdsourcing, attribute-based crowd entity resolution, attribute-based crowd entity resolution, technical report, crowd DQS, dynamic question selection in crowdsourcing, comprehensive and reliable crowd assessment algorithms, hybrid strategies for finding the max in the crowd technical report, then crowdsourcing structured data, collecting structured data from the crowd, optimizing graph algorithms and Fraggle that we discussed, context trees, crowdsourcing global understanding from local views, um, query optimization over crowdsource data, GPS, a graph processing system that we discussed. That's all I have for this presentation. See you until next time. Thank you.